Hello, everybody, and good afternoon, and welcome to Recovery Live. I'm Stephen Samra. I'm the Deputy Director of the SAMHSA Brass Tacks Project, and I'm frankly thrilled today to be able to share this event with you. This event is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Bringing Recovery Supports to Scale Technical Assistance Center Strategy, otherwise known as Brass Tacks. Our TA Center is dedicated to increasing access to recovery supports, and we achieve this work through a variety of mechanisms, including a lot of technical assistance focused on systems transformation and developing the capacity of peer-run recovery community and family and youth-led organizations. We are very fortunate to have a couple of incredible presenters with us today who will be providing us a robust discussion to introduce shared decision-making. And our presentation today is going to explore what shared decision-making is. We'll share a few insights about the practice. We're going to provide an example of accessing a shared decision-making tool. And we're also going to respond to participant and audience questions about this topic. The Brass Tacks team also stands by ready to support all of you through technical assistance on this topic and a wide variety of others. And you can visit the SAMHSA Brass Tacks webpage and apply for technical assistance online in really less than about 5 minutes. Now, I'm pleased to introduce today's, just like I said, incredible presenters. We're going to start with Dr. Wayne Centrone, who is a Senior Health Advisor with the Center for Social Innovation, a colleague of mine and somebody I've worked very closely with over the years. And next we'll hear from Sade Ali, who is the president of the First Nations LLC located in Delaware. Now I'm going to be turning things over to them very quickly, but first I have a few housekeeping items just to go through with all of you. Recovery Live events are different from usual webinars. We love it when folks engage directly with our presenters and each other through the live chat box, and you will also be answering several audience poll questions. The presenters are going to share some of their initial thoughts, and we're going to answer questions that you raised during this event. So it's likely you'll see a lot of movement and activity in the room. We hope that you will find that energizing and exciting. You can share your questions and comments throughout this event. Audience members are in a listen-only mode, but you can submit questions by typing them into the comments and questions here box. Now, if you experience any technical difficulties, please request assistance in that same box. We have tech support standing by. They're viewing your comments, and they will respond quickly to your needs. We also have a couple of resources to this topic available for download from our resources box. To download a file, highlight the name of the document. A download button is going to light up in the box. You just click that button, and the document will automatically be sent to your computer. Often our audience members share links to their own favorite resources in the chat box. And this event is being recorded, and the recording link will be shared with all registrants after the event. This way, you'll be able to review the chat, rewatch the presenters, find the links that you may have seen during the live event, and you'll still have access to them. Today's session is going to last approximately 1 hour, and if, as you are listening to this content, you feel your organization may need technical assistance around this or any other topic, please copy the link for our online TA request form from the instructions box. As people were arriving today, we posted a poll question for you all to answer. So let's just take a quick look at what some of the responses to this poll are. So I'm looking at the poll question, folks, is what is your role? And bear with me, I'm going to need to make this just a little larger so I can read all of the responses. So people in recovery, looks like we've got a good chunk, about 25% of folks that are people in recovery. We've got a good cohort of family members. Love to see the peer support staff here, and that, of course, encompasses basically anything peer work related. We've got a good number of SUD clinical treatment and mental health clinical treatment providers on board. Looks like we've got a couple of physicians, fantastic. A good a cohort of program supervisors. Looks like about 5 EDs, executive directors, fantastic. A few students, great. I love to see policymakers here, researchers, and interestingly, we've got about 33% of folks marking other. So it's a really diverse group. I'm thrilled to see that many different folks here joining, and I hope you'll all gain some additional information and get some benefit out of this event. So thank you all for responding, and we're going to bring up another poll as we prepare for the presentations. And there's going to be one additional poll later on in the event, so I'm just kind of giving you guys all a heads up right now. The style of today's event is really dependent on audience participation, and we really encourage you to join in with the polls and the chat and be part of this. This is your event. Now, when we close the room at the conclusion of today's events, a satisfaction questionnaire is going to automatically open in your internet browser. We really do appreciate you taking a few minutes of time to complete this survey. Your answers help us better create and craft these live events. So we greatly appreciate your time and effort in that. All right, enough from me. Let's get to the good stuff. Wayne, will you kick us off, please?
Stephen, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be on this webinar with such a diverse group of people from around the United States. I've been watching the comments and questions box, and it's amazing the diversity that we have geographically represented on this webinar today on the Recovery Live. As Stephen mentioned, we've been showing the poll, and it looks like we've got a fair amount of diversity of the participants in the webinar with shared decision-making. You know, I should start by really making it clear. Shared decision-making is not a replacement for any treatment, but an additive component that hopes to enhance the relationship between a patient and a provider, patients and therapists, peers and people in recovery, and people with people. So shared decision-making is an opportunity for engagement. And really today in this short framework discussion, I want to give you a little explanation to the history, give you some clear ways that shared decision-making is being used in practice today, talk to you about the why of shared decision-making, allow you to understand some of the core concepts of shared decision-making as a model, and demonstrate some of the evidence base for the use of shared decision-making. I've been really fortunate throughout my career to be mentored and supported by a number of individuals, one of whom is on this call today. Stephen Samra has been a colleague and a true leader in my life for a number of years. Another is Miss Lori Curtis. Lori Curtis is one of the early champions in the use of shared decision-making in mental health and substance use disorder treatment. And one of the things that Lori has taught me quite a bit is that shared decision-making as a model is an opportunity to change the conversation. Change the conversation so that everyone can understand what their leanings are, what their preferences are, and how to work together with a provider, practitioner, with a therapist to meet needs. The history of shared decision-making is diverse. There's no one moment in time where shared decision-making evolved. There are some clear places where the formation really took hold. In 1982, it actually became recognized as a President's Commission. In 1989, the Foundation for Informed Medical Decision-Making was founded. And in the 1990s, Dartmouth-Hitchcock started the first Center for Shared Decision-Making. But really, it goes back even further than that. And the early influences of shared decision-making are very much influenced in this ongoing struggle to understand the power dynamic. In 1988, the Picker Institute coined the phrase patient-centered care. And then Barbara Starfield, the late great pediatrician, went on to call person-focused care. And what we've learned from person-focused care and patient-centered care is that people need an opportunity to have their needs met, their preferences understood, and their leanings defined. In the early 1970s, David Wenberg worked on this practice variation understanding. Later, Dr. Albert Mulley formed the Foundation for Informed Medical Decision-Making. Dr. Paul Elwood in the 1980s went on to form this even greater. And what we have today is a real modern conceptual framework that in its origin is designed at helping people to gain access to information and preference understanding that allows them to join up with their provider, a physician, a therapist, a practitioner, to better understand options and to discuss how those options can be applied to their personal needs. Now, the practice of shared decision-making is really grounded in the foundation of person-centeredness and trauma-informed and motivationally enhanced and all the evidence-based practices that are now so germane to the practice of services delivery. And really, shared decision-making is less of a practice and more of a philosophical precept. Shared decision-making ultimately is about complementing strengths. It's not an if-or, it's a both-and approach. It's about helping to build collaboration in a meaningful way so that two parties can show up equal as experts. Clinicians are experts in understanding the nuances of the application of science, and patients are experts in understanding their own needs. And shared decision-making is about bringing two parties together to fully represent the best interest of both. It's a preparation-based practice, and in many instances, shared decision-making is supported by decision support tools or shared decision-making resources, many of which are now web-based, and allow people to understand the nuances of complex situations. Shared decision-making works best when there is no one route to treatment. Very rarely are there singular routes to treatment. Certainly in some cases, as for example in the treatment of tuberculosis, there really is no other alternative to the treatment of tuberculosis than with evidence-based antibiotic treatment, antimicrobial treatment. So the use of shared decision-making as a model can still be applied, but as a treatment modality has a more limited access point. Shared decision-making is a dialectic, meaning two parties coming together and understanding needs and really talking about those needs. Shared decision-making ultimately allows for the systemization, the structure of partnerships in care. And it avoids this notion of any one clinician having the skills that really ultimately carry good care forward, that everyone working together can carry good care forward. It brings transparency and it allows for the kind of collegiality that healthcare is so predicated on today. Really, ultimately, as Lori taught me, this changing the conversation component of shared decision-making is more of an experience than an actual event. It doesn't happen in a single, this is the way type manner, but it happens in many different ways by inviting conversation and offering an opportunity for relationship enhancement. It allows for insight where a patient can truly understand, a person in recovery can truly begin to identify what are their preferences, what are their leanings, what are they most interested in with regard to treatment and treatment options. It allows for the discernment of options and a definite understanding of the risks and benefits and alternatives within those options. And ultimately, it's about enhancing the relationship, what we now refer to as the therapeutic alliance. The evidence base for shared decision-making is growing. I think it's pretty important to understand that as an evidence-based practice, shared decision-making is a model that helps to support the application of evidence-based practices. And evidence-based practices are very much embedded in the use of shared decision-making. And in fact, much of the shared decision-making resources, decision aids, decision support tools that exist today are driven in evidence-based systems. But really, ultimately, shared decision-making is probably better referred to as a practice-based evidence than an evidence-based practice. Because ultimately, bringing two people together and helping them understand options that are available is about making sure that people understand those options and have as many different pathways to understanding those options as possible. So we have to break some myths. We have to break the myth that people aren't interested. 2006 study pretty clearly demonstrated that people are interested in understanding options and having a share in a decision about their treatment. We have to also break a myth that shared decision making takes too much time. A 2014 study showed that it's actually a time-saving modality. And we have to break the myth that it's just about a tool or a website or a bunch of information. Because in fact, shared decision making in its greatest sense is this linking of two people together. And that means that the people involved in this relationship need to come together as collaborators and partners. So it reinforces practices, but it more reinforces the notion of partnership. So thanks for allowing me just to give you a few minutes of introduction to shared decision making and the nuances of shared decision making. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Shade, who's going to talk to you about the sort of application of the shared decision making in the real world. Shade?
Thank you so much, Wayne. I'd like to say a special welcome to all of our participants. I saw names that I have known for a very long time, and some of you I've worked with. Melody, it's good to see you here in this space. Melody was one of our pioneers in the transformation of behavioral health systems in Philadelphia, and it's really good to see you. It's very good to be here, and I'm very honored to be here. I really think it's important for people with lived experience to tell their stories, and I'm a person with lived experience. I have been in long-term recovery from a substance use challenge for 48 years, and I've been in the field for that long too. I was also diagnosed in 1992 with a bipolar challenge, and you'll see I don't use words that tend to be stigmatizing or to identify people by their challenges. And as a matter of fact, in Philadelphia, I got the title, the Transformation Language Police. So there were a lot of words that you couldn't say around me, and some of them were to identify people by the challenges they presented with. But in 1992, I was in recovery for a while from my challenge with drugs, and I still was feeling pretty badly. So I ended up going to a psychiatrist. It was the only psychiatric practice in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where I was living at the time. And I went to the doctor, and I had a whole 15 minutes with him. And in those 15 minutes, he labeled me a bipolar and threw a prescription for lithium across his desk at me. And what seemed to me an entire novel of contraindications around this medication, why you shouldn't take it. And I left that office with him never having even shaken my hand. He never called me by my name, and he certainly knew less about me than I had hoped when I walked into that office. So I left dejected. I left feeling minimalized and marginalized, and certainly a lot worse than I felt when I walked into his office. I was in the field at the time, however, and I am a huge proponent of people with lived experience helping people with lived experience. And so I went to some of my peers and we talked, and I was able to feel better about the interaction I had with this doctor. And I've never been a person to just sit back and listen to things and not have some kind of action. So I dedicated the next 30 years of my practice, and I stayed in the field, to changing the behavior that I had experienced with this particular doctor. In the process, I learned how to take care of myself, what my personal medicine was, what made me feel good, because as I said, the doctor never asked me who I was. He never asked me what my spirituality was, what my belief system was, how I felt about life and the people in my life, what made me happy, or what brought me joy. He never asked me about my culture, which was and always has been extremely important to me. I happen to be First Nations, what they call Native Americans in Canada. I'm from a small reserve up in Nova Scotia. And my Native heritage has always been extremely important to me. And it's that heritage and sitting with others in a circle around a sacred fire and sharing our experiences and talking. Some people call it peer support. That's what it was. It's always been extremely important to me, but he didn't know that. And so as we were going forward and transforming systems of care to be person-directed, which is what we heard at a SAMHSA meeting in 2005. I was at a consensus meeting with the Center for Mental Health Services at SAMHSA. And the people with lived experience who were there, it was called person-centered care. And it was a symposia on person-centered care. And people with lived experience who were there, they had these T-shirts that said, "Nothing about us without us." And that so resonated with me, and I added that to the way I thought about the work I was doing and why people need to be at the table, and how if a clinician creates a plan of care for you and you're not involved, it's their plan and not your plan. All of that, I internalized all of that. And the people with lived experience at this symposium in Washington, D.C., said, all of this person-centered care, it's all well and good, but we want more. And Paolo Del Vecchio said, what more do you want? And they said, we want person-directed care. And I added that to the way I did business, so that the person really was in the car. And this is a quote that I heard from a woman who was receiving care at a large mental health authority where I worked when I worked for the state of Connecticut with Arthur Evans. And she said, "You telling me that I'm the driver of my treatment, but I'm not even in the car." Now that's powerful if you really think about it. So we're telling people who have heretofore not felt that they were passive recipients, and that people were doing things to them and for them instead of with them. We found we had to retrain all of the people who were receiving services too, because they were so used to being passive recipients. And I decided I wanted to help change that, and that's what I've been doing for the past 30 years. It hasn't been easy, because people don't learn these things in school. They learn how to diagnose. My degrees are in psychology. I learned how to do psychological evaluations and testing, and I knew how to diagnose. I knew how to use the DSM-4 to give you a label. But I didn't really know anything about the person until I asked the person. So they became the experts in the care and a partner in that care. And that's what we did in Philadelphia. We changed the balance of power so that people and family members and significant others were equal partners in the care, and they were not just passive recipients. And that hasn't always been easy, and it's still a process, because I still hear things from people, well, I went to school for this, I'm the expert. But until I tell you who I am, you don't know anything about me. Just like this psychiatrist who knew nothing about me except what he thought he saw in front of him. It was extremely important for him to know who I was, what I believed, what my passions were, and what made me feel better. And the only way he could have known that is to ask. trying to see if I have time for a very quick story, and it doesn't seem like I do. So I'm going to pass on back to Stephen, and hopefully we'll have time in the wrap-up. Thank you.
Fantastic, Sade, and thank you. That was just great, and I'm hoping that we will have time for you to be able to share that story in the wrap-up. What I'd like to do now, folks, is just move into questions and answers. We've got about 20 minutes for that. I've got a couple of questions now, and I'm going to encourage everybody as you listen and to the presenters respond, feel free to ask your questions in the chat box, and we'll get them over to the presenters as quickly as possible. So this is to both of you, and you guys can determine how you want to respond. But there appears to be growing interest in a mental health and within the addictions communities to really utilize shared decision-making as a viable approach to supporting and empowering individuals seeking treatment. Can you guys talk a little bit about what that current landscape looks like? And do you have any recommendations for how to expand the use or raise awareness within these communities of the viability and frankly, the efficacy of using shared decision-making?
That's a great question. Sade, do you want to go first? I mean, it strikes me that you have a real clear model with the work they did in Philadelphia.
Absolutely. And again, it wasn't easy. We had the way we did it was we went to the communities in which the programs that people were accessing lived. And we didn't try to push things down. We went to the community and asked them what they needed, which is very, very important. And then we found some champions. It's really important to find your champions because once one program has success, others see that success. And for us, it was all about outcomes. Outcomes where people were actually taking their lives back, becoming successful members of their communities again, not spending time, but the first thing we did was work with our so-called day programs where people with serious mental health challenges would sit in these programs, and the people who took advantage of those programs called it Coke and Smoke. And when I heard that, I was horrified. I said, what does that mean? Well, we smoke and we drink Coca-Cola or we drink coffee all day. And that's what you do? Yes. So we decided to work and transform these programs, help them transform, working with the executive directors and teaching them about what that shared decision-making, what that transformation of their mindset around people and their ability to heal. And we worked with them, and what we found was remarkable. People who were not going into the hospital, they were not having emergency room visits, and that's the bottom line for a lot of executive directors is that money. And so they weren't accessing the higher levels of care, and they were getting on with their lives. And people were getting into and maintaining a recovery in a community they chose with jobs, with schooling, with a reconnection with family. And this is what the idea of listening to people when they tell you what they need and what they desire and what their hopes and dreams are, and actually putting them first. So there was the doctors started working differently with the people they were serving, and the outcomes were stunning. And the bottom line was the reduction of people going into higher levels of care, into the hospital emergency rooms, and actually moving on with their lives. It was remarkable. And you don't start huge, you start small. You start at the ground level with the communities in which your program is. and talk to the people and actually listen to what they have to say. This is the difference in a lot of systems. You know, we create a program and we put it in a community and we expect, what will we say, why isn't it working? Why aren't people doing well? It's their fault. No, if you have a community, say in North Philly, and you're not dealing with the community in North Philly and with the neighborhoods of North Philly, and you have a program in an area where there's primarily people of Asian ancestry of all those different communities, and you have an English-speaking program, and the majority of the people in the neighborhood don't speak English, it's not their fault that the program isn't working. So people, there should never be a one-size-fits-all, or there should never be a top-down. It has to be bottom-up.
Sade, that's great. And in fact, that's sort of the perfect place for me to add my 2 cents, if you will. You know, ultimately, there is no one-size-fits-all. So the development of models is about an application of those models in appropriate environments. And what we're finding is that there's a growing level of application of shared decision-making and decision-based resources. Let me be perfectly clear. Shared decision-making as a methodological model is about the application of person-centered, patient-centered practice. Shared decision-making tools and resources, decision aids, decision support tools, those are oftentimes about helping people begin to think through preferences. If we really think back to a seminal report that the Institute of Medicine produced in 2001, the Crossing the Quality Chasm report, what was really important to that report, and what really the report identified, was that patient-centered care is care that is respectful and responsive to individual patient preferences. And the application of this can be the same in substance use disorder, working with patients with mental health conditions, working with families who have youth and young adults who are in care. And ultimately, shared decision-making is about providing a model, accessing information, and then aligning two parties so that they can be in discussion about next steps and options. Now, the application of shared decision-making in mental health, substance use, and in behavioral health in general is really just beginning. But this model of person-centered care delivery, the sort of nothing about me without me that Valerie Billingham brought to light in 1988, has been applied over and over again. Now, one of the questions that came up while we were in this discussion, Sade, is a question about the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act and its application to shared decision-making. One of the techniques that clinics are using, that agencies are using, that care plan organizations are using, is to provide patients access to shared decision-making resources, web-based shared decision-making resources, and encouraging patients, people in recovery, individuals, people, to look at that resource prior to coming into an appointment. And requesting the same thing from the providers, in that the hope that two parties would come together around a common understanding about need and preference. And in fact, many of the shared decision-making resources that exist now have opportunity for people to go through worksheets, to fill out some tools that they can then print or even email to their provider and bring into an appointment. So again, it's really sort of, as Sade said, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all, and that models have to be applied in the most appropriate environments, with the application that models only work when people use them. So it's sort of training people as well as developing models.
Wayne and Sade, that was fantastic. Thank you both. There was just a ton of information that was just provided, and I think, you know, my next question is going to sort of dovetail on that kind of, you know, response, along with the, you know, a piece of the HIPAA discussion, and let me pose the question to you so it makes sense. For decades, we have been educating families that SUD is a family disease. However, we do not include families very well in the treatment and recovery other than bare minimum educational programs. how are families included in this process? And there's a dovetailed question that came in that I think fits really well with that. How do you encourage families to buy into this process with adolescents?
Well, I think for many years, and I've been doing this since 1970. We used to look myopically at the symptom. We looked at the alcohol or other drugs, and when I first got into the field, those were two separate things. It's so counterintuitive today. But we looked at the alcohol or at the other drug. We didn't look to the left or to the right. We didn't look at trauma. We didn't look at family. We didn't look at community. We didn't look at anything else but that symptom. And now, today, with recovery-oriented systems of care, and shared decision-making is an important pillar of recovery-oriented systems of care that we talk about in general. We understand that the person's support system and their significant others and family, and we don't define who family is, they define who family is, are major players in a person's recovery. Now, if somebody doesn't want their family or any other supporters involved, that's their right and their responsibility. But if they do, they should be at the table as well. And today, in 2018, we have people at the table. So if there's a care plan meeting, it's not providers sitting in a room together and discussing somebody. Again, nothing about us without us. The person is there along with their family members, along with their support people, and the language that's used, and we love our jargon in this field. We do love our jargon, but we don't use it. We use words that people can understand, and you don't have to have a medical dictionary next to you in order to understand it. So we include people, and it's not always easy, Stephen, because especially in folks and in both mental health challenges and with substance use challenges, oftentimes the family is burnt out. There's bridges that have been burned. There's people have thrown up their hands, but where possible, I think as a system, as a behavioral health system, we need to do what we can to be able to bring everybody to the table and make them feel like they're welcome at the table and that they have a voice at that table. I'm so glad to see this field turned around, because when I hear people say, oh, I'm old school, I cringe, because really, if I had a physician that didn't have medical credits, and hadn't been up on the latest innovations in his field, I wouldn't go to him. So we are in the behavioral health field are the only ones who want to do things the way we did it 40 years ago and then expect different results. So I think as we mature in this field and as we understand what the term recovery really means, we are coming full circle and realizing that it's not only about the drug or the mental health symptom. There's all these other things: mind, body, soul, spirit, the family, the community, the work life, the spirituality. All of that makes up the person. And if you try to cut pieces out of any of those pieces out of people, they leave your office in pieces. So it's about trying to work together and understanding that everybody should have a voice. Everybody should have a voice.
Yeah, fantastic. I don't know that I have anything to add to that. I can say that I've been very fortunate to work on a project that's developing a shared decision-making resource specifically focused on the needs of families with children who have serious mental illness or who are struggling with how to find access to resources for behavioral health conditions. And we're working on that right now. In the field study work of developing the evidence for that tool, we talked to a lot of families, and what we found over and over again is that it's the same strategies that are being used to promote shared decision-making in a clinician, provider, physician audience. It's an emphasis on gaining access to better communication skills and more enhanced communication skills. So how do you have a conversation with a provider? If you have a leaning toward, a preference toward, how do you come to your provider and say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I want, this is where my preference pulls me, this is kind of what I'm most interested in. And the other is, how do you help people to really values clarify? And that is not just how do you help people decide what treatment is best for them, but what treatment options are best for them, and where in that sort of broad continuum of treatment options can they best settle for their values. And so the same skill we're trying to use for helping to adopt shared decision-making in clinical and health maintenance and practice-based environments are the same strategies that can be used in working with patients, clients, people, which is helping to enhance communication and really helping to clarify values and opinions and needs. I noticed that there's a lot of questions about where are these tools being applied. And shared decision-making tools, you know, in the 1990s, there were less than 500 shared decision-making tools that were of enough clarification that they could be defined as a shared decision-making tool or a decisional aid. Now there are literally hundreds and hundreds. The Mayo Clinic, Dartmouth Hitchcock Center, Dr. Pat Deegan and Common Ground, just to name a very few. And there are even more out there. A recent study that was published out of the UK, out of Manchester, England, by Sandra Buki and colleagues, showed that an app has extraordinarily effective use in patients with severe persistent mental illness and helping the values clarify, helping to have patients truly understand what treatment options are available, and in many ways, helping people to define kind of routes to ongoing care engagement. And these are very valuable things regardless of what population we're speaking of.
Yeah, I see a question here about the problem-solving courts, the mental health courts and the drug courts, and whether or not they're using shared decision-making tools. And I will tell you, yes, they are. I know this because I'm on faculty of their conference. They have a large conference every year. Over 6,000 people attend. I work in the track of the Healing to Wellness courts, which are the courts that are in across the country in Native America. So they're located on some of the tribal reserves in the United States. And they're very unique in their approach, and the way that they actually do business is very different than in a regular court of law, where there is a much more let me say much more they just run differently. Let me put it that way. They run differently in that the respect level is so high, and people are addressed in dignified manners, and especially in the Healing to Wellness courts, they use cultural healing there. And I actually saw a video from the Penobscot Nation up in Indian Island and Maine, who are using traditional medicine in their drug court, and their drug court is held in a circle. And those of you, I know I saw someone from the Blackfeet Nation from Montana. I know that you know the power of the circle. There's no little, I'm not more important than you, are all just in the circle, and the judge is in the circle too. And so these are very, very different. And I'm so glad I was around for the very beginning of the drug courts and actually saw some of the earlier ones, and was so impressed with the way people were treated with dignity and respect. So yes, they are definitely using shared decision-making in these particular specialty courts, and I'm very glad of it.
Yeah, ultimately, shared decision-making is something that can be used anytime there is choice.
Yep.
And what we've seen, data is now really substantiating this claim. When there is choice, there is much better adherence. There's much better compliance. There's much better engagement. So choice is critical. And one of the ways that real choice is being defined is in helping people to understand the knowledge that exists, the information exists. Look, the reality is that people can't make decisions in a shared way unless people can share information. So shared decision making is about gaining access to information, understandable information, and then using that information in a relationship to come out with a course that makes life need, that really defines where you want to be and how that will help to enhance your values. So I think anywhere there's choice, shared decision making can be applied. And specifically, it works quite well, and the data is now substantiating this when treatment is one of those crossroads of choice, options for treatment.
Yep. And for years I've been doing training across the country and into Canada, and I was even in Africa doing some training in Nigeria. And I could go anywhere in any program and pick up any chart, and especially with people in treatment for a substance use challenge, and I would open the chart, and on the treatment plan, it would say the first goal was abstinence. Well, whose goal is that? Was it really the person's goal, or was it the clinician's goal? So if you ask the person what their goal was, it was probably something like, I want to reunite with my family, or I want to get a job, or I want to reconnect with my faith community.
Yeah.
Those need to be listened to, because they all lead up to so-called abstinence, or a reduction or an ending of use of alcohol or other drugs to medicate something. So those things are what you see when you go to a program who really believes in recovery-oriented systems of care and whose clinicians really listen to people when they talk. It's really about that partnership, and you can tell a program that doesn't have that, because you get things like the first goal is abstinence, the second goal is 90 meetings in 90 days. Well, their fellowship is wonderful, and lots of people have used it as a tool to get on their road and stay on their road, but it's not for everybody. So the promotion of many roads to recovery is part of this shared decision making. What keeps me on my road is sitting in a sacred circle with my people and talking about intergenerational trauma and healing. Now, is that everybody's road? No, but it's my road, and that's important. And when you see a plan of care that doesn't include that you can't see the person's voice anywhere, it's not the person's plan. It's the clinician's plan. And we should not wonder why people don't do well in care. We certainly shouldn't blame them.
Wow, guys, that was fantastic. There are several more questions that I think both of you would provide just incredible responses to. But I need to be mindful of the time, and one of the things I want to do is bring up a final poll in the room. And basically what this poll is going to ask is, how many of you have used the shared decision-making tool? And we're going to leave this up for a bit. I'm going to turn this back over to Wayne to do a live demonstration to actually access a shared decision-making tool that lives online. And then we're going to come back with a close. Wayne will report out on that final poll. I'll have a teeny bit of housekeeping, a reminder that there's going to be a satisfaction questionnaire coming up, and we'll get everybody out of here at the top of the hour. So Wayne, can you take it away?
Got it, Stephen. Thank you very much. I'm watching the numbers come in from the poll. It looks like a good percentage of you are familiar with shared decision-making tools and have used them. And so at this point, I'm going to do a live demonstration of a shared decision-making tool that was developed under the brass tacks contract under the leadership of Captain Wanda Finch. And I'm going to sort of show you in real time what a shared decision-making tool is and how it can be utilized in practice. So I'll share my screen at this point, if you will. And I'm going to take you first to sort of show that you can just simply search through any search engine. So we'll go to Google and we'll put decisions in recovery, and it automatically comes up. It's well search term sequenced. And if you hit on the SAMHSA store, it will take you to a launch pad in the SAMHSA store that provides you access to the handbook. So this is a tool that's available in a companion handbook. It's a mirrored handbook that contains all of the same information, or directly over to the decision-making tool. Now, in many ways, as we've been stating over and over again, shared decision-making is about helping people to preference seek and to really instill their opinion. This particular shared decision-making tool is focused on 3 seminal questions. Should I start medication-assisted treatment? If I do decide I wish to start medication-assisted treatment, which of the 3 current licensed medication-assisted treatments in the United States are best for me? And that's methadone, buprenorphine, and intramuscular naltrexone. And if I do decide that I wish to start a medication-assisted treatment, how do I get started? So should I, which, and how? And so the tool builds on what we call a layered effect. And that layered effect allows people to gain more and more access to information as they deem appropriate to their needs. And the first layer in every one of the tiers in this website is video layered. So people can watch videos that relate to the common theme. In this particular instance, the common theme is, I'm thinking about making a change. They can also dive deeper into that layer to answer some pretty seminal questions or important critical questions around, why is it hard to stop? What is it that really leads to this connection between opioids and pain management? And why do people start using opioids? As you go deeper into the tool, you find more and more information that's specific to medication-assisted treatment. In each one of these areas are specific, what we call resources. And they're tools, they're worksheets that allow people to kind of think through what their preferences are, what they're leaning toward. They can print these sheets and take them into their appointment, or you'll see that it will come up in a PDF format, and you can actually download this, save it onto a jump drive, and email it onto a provider or a clinician. In the which do I start, you again see these tiered approaches with the 3 principal medications that are licensed in the United States for the treatment of opioid use disorder: methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone, and a comparative chart that allows you to look at the differences in the medications, looking at differences in mechanisms of action, side effects, accessibility to the medication, health concerns associated with the medication and the prescribing, the nuances of starting or initiating therapy and discontinuing or stopping therapy, and any known warnings or real triggered side effects that people should be aware of. Again, a shared decision-making tool is meant to be a tool that aligns with a partnership. So this information is supposed to be information that you then take to expand the conversation with your provider. There's a whole section here in the how do I start and how to get information about planning for success, how to build a recovery team and recovery supports, and how to talk to your provider, and even how to find a provider. So it links you to national treatment locators, state-by-state directories, physician locators for physicians who have buprenorphine waivers, and information general to how to find behavioral treatment in your geographic area. There's a whole consolidated area of what we call interactive or cool tools that really thematically approach this whole concept of what are my leanings, what are my preferences, and where do I go from here? And then there's a whole section that's specific to providers. How to use a shared decision-making tool in practice, what is shared decision-making, how to actually operationalize it, shared decision-making into a practice environment, so more than just for the clinician, but for the system, and then helpful hints from providers to providers on how to use shared decision-making for behavioral health. And then finally, a whole list of provider-based resources. Now, this has been just a very short, brief, if you will, introduction to shared decision-making. The goal is that within this, people can begin to understand what is shared decision-making, what options are available for the treatment of opioid use disorder as it relates to medication-assisted treatment, and how can recovery fit into the treatment of opioid use disorder. So, Stephen, I'm going to turn now back over to our formal presentation and just kind of quickly go over some of the main highlights of the tool, and ultimately recognizing that these main highlights are really just about helping people to engage. So the tool is based on 3 real important questions: whether, which, and how. It has layered approaches. The reading level, we did our best to keep it down around the 6th to 9th grade level. It provides head-to-head comparisons so people can really begin to understand preferences. There's a number of different ways to access content, from video to written format, and each and every one of those layers is designed at giving people information that's accessible to them. Ultimately, this is a tool that was developed for people and by people in recovery. And I'm proud to say that Mr. Stephen Samra, who's on this call right now, is a subject matter expert in helping to put this tool together. Stephen, I can turn it back over to you.
Fantastic, Wayne, and thank you to Sade and Wayne both. Guys, there was just so much information, and you know, I've been just watching the chat and watching how people are responding. I think, you know, folks are going to walk away today with some really valuable information, and I think a new perspective around the you know, the whole sort of kind of model of shared decision making, what those tools look like, how to access them. It's been really fantastic. The one thing I do want to point out about the Decisions in Recovery tool itself that I think is really important, particularly for those of us with addiction histories and who are contemplating whether or not this is the right choice for recovery. And I certainly am one of those individuals. I spent years in a medication-assisted treatment program. And there is a lot of stigma or discrimination and fear around how people might respond to those of us who have used medication-assisted treatment. And one of the great things about this tool is that as it lives online, it collects no data or information from you. And so when you use it, you are anonymous in the use of that tool. And when you are able to do those you know, the various decision guide tools, sheets, tip sheets that are there, and the checklists, none of those are associated with you personally. And so I think that anonymity is a really critical piece to protect you know, us as we, you know, really consider whether or not this is a viable approach. So Wayne and Sade, thank you again. This has just been fantastic. We're also really glad that so many of you could come today and spend time with us. You know, of course, I want to thank our presenters for their knowledge and willingness to share it with us all. And just the, you know, the congeniality of you know, how everybody kind of presented today. I really want to thank SAMHSA for giving us this opportunity to hear, share, and discuss this important topic. And the final thing that I'll tell you and remind you all about is that there's going to be a link to a satisfaction survey. It's going to pop up when we close, and we're going to close in just about a minute from now. It'll take you less than 3 minutes to complete it, and we hope that you'll give us the feedback on the presentation today and you know, the structure of the room. Your comments and suggestions really are important to us, and they help us shape the, you know, the content and the actual presentations moving forward. Now, if you've got any additional questions around any of this, by all means, put them in the satisfaction survey. There's a place to do that. Please consider reaching out for technical assistance with Brass Tacks at any time. It's a simple process. You know, head to the SAMHSA Brass Tacks website, and it'll take you less than 5 minutes to make that happen. And I want to thank you all for joining us today, this fine Thursday. Have a great rest of your day and a fantastic weekend. And Brass Tacks stands by, ready to support any individual or organization that's looking for recovery assistance. Thank you all, and have a great day.